the Centre on the Dynamics of Ethnicity, wanted to know what it was like working in the cultural and creative sector during a global pandemic which hit many culture industries hard and during a time of increased attention to ethnic inequalities.
Mal, do you want to share your experiences of this year and specifically, what the pandemic meant for your career? It sounds like you went through a bit of a career change actually.
Well, I actually lost my job. The production I was working on, obviously like so many other productions during the pandemic, just couldn't carry on. And so in June last year, or May maybe, all of us just lost our job. We had like 1 week's notice and then it was like, you have no role. So that was really hard. I think I was really lucky that I already had like 3 or 4 years in the industry, that I'd made those contacts and I had those people that I knew I could go to and ask if they had any jobs going, which again, obviously if we look back, that was because of Creative Access kind of getting me in there in the first place. So I think I was lucky that I was able to find a job after a few weeks back at the BBC, which is where I was. But also, like I said, I did have a bit of a career change. I think the pandemic gave me time, probably like it gave everyone, just to like slow down and like kind of think about why I'd got into the TV industry in the first place and like what it was that I was interested in. And so I think it gave me the opportunity to like introduce myself to people and just reach out to people who were in the drama sector. And I was lucky that I managed to do that. I think a lot of it was just because I'd built a lot of confidence from like having quite a few years in the industry already.
When the pandemic started, I'd just been promoted, and I think I had like an idea of what my job role would be, and then actually working from home changed it significantly. Like it sort of was my job but sped up, in that like suddenly it's like, well, everyone's at home, meet as many writers as you can, speak to as many agents as you can, like we need to be developing because we're not doing anything else, we can't make anything yet. And so in that aspect it was exciting because it meant that I was constantly busy, but it also meant that like I was always exhausted, and like sort of the balance between, especially like the nature of our work is a lot of like being creative and thinking, like it just sort of felt like I was constantly working even when I wasn't working. Can't really turn on the TV and watch TV because I'm just thinking about like, oh, would we do that way? Like it just sort of felt like I was stuck constantly working, and I was starting to worry that I wasn't doing anything good because like I haven't taken a break. You're not doing the things that you usually do where you go for a walk and you have lunch and you overhear a conversation and you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. You take it back and you like have a chat as a group. Kind of felt like all of our meetings became really formal, and it's time to like present like a fully fledged idea as opposed to like, oh, we would have just battered this around in the office for a while.
April, what was your experience of the pandemic? What impact did it have on your career?
Yeah, I mean, it was a scary time. I was lucky that I was kind of employed. So in my career I've kind of worked on a freelance basis, but this time in March last year I was employed by an organisation. So at first I wasn't sure what was going to happen. Then I was put on furlough for about 5 months, which at first I was like relieved because it was just a lot of pressure, and I think I just needed that time, if I'm honest. But then as time went on, I was like, am I going to have a job after the furlough period? And to be honest with you, I was more concerned about my family, which is why I was relieved for the furlough, because some of my family caught COVID, and this was at a time when there was just so many deaths, especially in the Black and Asian minority communities. And I, at that point, did not care about work. It was like more of a life or death thing, and so for that short like period when it was like the height of the pandemic and everything went into lockdown, I was like kind of like ready to it kind of felt like, why am I doing this work when like I don't know if my family are going to be okay. But I definitely felt at the beginning, if I'm honest, that I was alone, and that my white colleagues were like, oh, it's just a flu, it will pass. Whereas like in my immediate family, people were really getting ill, and I even then felt there was like a racial disparity in that. And then obviously it turned into the pandemic that we know now, and like realized, okay, this is not going to go away, put on furlough. But then I think my friends and colleagues who were self-employed were really hit the hardest, because there was more uncertainty there, whereas I felt like, oh, I have a bit of job security here, but I don't, if that makes sense. I knew that I had like work to continue, that was paused, and that was kind of re-strategizing how to still deliver it. And then I was taken back off furlough, thankfully, but then a lot of my colleagues were still on furlough, and a lot of the organisation was still at risk of redundancy. So it felt like a very weird time, and a precarious time, and a scary time.
Do you think there's any other issues that Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in particular would have felt the most during this pandemic, especially those trying to get into creative careers?
Well, I think that like you're asking people who maybe don't have a home office to suddenly find the funds to set up a home office, especially if you're an intern. Like when I first started working where I work, like I'd taken a pay cut to take that job, so it was already like, I don't know if I could pay the stuff that I'm supposed to pay anymore. I don't know how I would have had I still been in that role, been able to be like, right, I'm going to have to buy a desk and a chair, and I'm going to have to, you know, pay increased electricity bills because I'm at home all day, every day. Like, that would have been a really difficult thing to do. And I think had I been in that position, I might have just had to be like, I don't think I can do this anymore, because it's more of a cost than I can afford.
And that's based on the idea that, like, yeah, Black, Asian, brown people are more likely to be from low socioeconomic backgrounds.
I think as well, like for me and what I've seen, like from my experiences and people that I've spoken to, or you know, if people reach out and they're kind of trying to get into the industry, is I think obviously because the default is whiteness in the TV and a lot of other creative industries, and I think they often see hiring someone who's not white as a bit of a risk. And I think the pandemic obviously emphasized that and really exacerbated that, because there was so many people who are out of work and everyone was kind of scrambling to get a job, that I think employers are less likely to take what they see as a risk. And I think you, as someone trying to get into an industry where already you're so not represented, I know so many people who are just like, well, it's just too hard because people aren't willing to take a chance on me. And I think when there's the kind of added risk of, you know, the global pandemic, it's like so many people, just like what you said, just thought, well, do you know what, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to get a job where it's easier. And I think that's a real problem, because that's what we're trying to combat, and that is like why we're all here. It's like it shouldn't be seen as like, oh, we'll take this risk on this new person. It's like, well, why is it seen as a risk? And it, you know, it shouldn't be.